Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Crime Beat Conversations. I'm your host, Rafaela Lipschitz, and today I'm joined by Caroline Rose, the director of the New Lines Institute's Crime-Conflict Nexus Portfolio. Just a few days ago, on January 3rd, former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was captured by US forces and extradited to the United States to face charges of drug trafficking. Before his capture, the New Lines Institute released a report looking at whether regime change in Venezuela would have a significant impact on drug flows to the United States. And now, with his capture and with much attention on the country's oil sector and broader political change, Caroline and I are going to be taking a deep dive looking at this illicit landscape, what we can expect from various criminal actors, and assessing the threats that they might pose. Thanks so much for joining us, Caroline.
Thank you so much for having me, Rafi. It's great to be here.
So, Caroline, Trump's initial stated objective in this operation, in this military buildup around Venezuela, was to stop this narco-terrorism, as he called it. How much of an impact will Maduro's capture have on the flow of drugs to the United States?
It's a great question. I think that with this operation, this is something that was conducted under the assumption that with Maduro removed, now you have this system of illicit trafficking also dismantled. And I don't necessarily think it will be that easy. In fact, I think that as we've written at the Crime-Conflict Nexus Portfolio recently this week, this will actually complicate the illicit landscape. Simply because the structure that is in place within Maduro's regime, within the Venezuelan economy, within its political economy, is a lot more complex than I think than Washington gives it credit for. And so as a result, I think that the United States is now inheriting a much more nuanced, complicated, illicit landscape that it cannot be countered through just simply conducting regime change or removing the head or the kingpin. Instead, this is going to have to be tackled systemically, looking at signs of corruption and then also markers of corruption, how different officials, how different figures within Venezuelan business and political society engage with illicit networks, and really systematically look at how the U.S. can support a less corrupt and more licit and formal system moving forward. But it will not be easy. And I don't think that the Trump administration really took this into account.
A lot of attention has been paid to the so-called Cartel de los Soles, which is some of these corrupt military or intelligence officials that generate revenue through drug trafficking. What do you expect to happen to this cartel or this network or this untraditional sort of structure of people now that Maduro has been captured?
Well, I think it is so important to remember that CDS, as you just mentioned, it's not necessarily like a traditional hierarchical structured cartel network. Instead, this is really a culture or a system where you have individuals, some in governmental positions, some not. And this is more so a dynamic and a culture that has persisted around illicit trafficking rather than a top-down hierarchy that we see in other cartel, mafia, and illicit syndicate networks. And so as a result, I think that it is very important that Washington and its partners recognize this reality and do not oversimplify CDS as an organization that can be completely eradicated within weeks or months, and instead understand that this is very much a system that has been enabled by this culture of corruption, weak governance, and of course, insecurity in Venezuela.
Another actor that I think we should be looking at is the ELN, this Colombian insurgent group along the border that are involved in drug trafficking operations. How do you expect them to react to Maduro's capture, and how big of an impact will his capture have on their trafficking operations?
Well, it's notable that Trump, almost immediately after Maduro arrived in New York City for his detention and subsequent trial. It's notable how the Trump administration has been very vocal about other countries that they might be setting their sights on. And I think that the case in Venezuela was, in some cases, a test case for foreign policy analysts and security analysts to gauge just how willing the Trump administration, how they are in terms of toppling different regimes and really carrying out intervention. And I think that the case of Venezuela has proven that this administration is willing to go after not only drug cartels, not only illicit networks that this administration is deeming as terrorist organizations, but also the political leadership there. And so as a result, I think that Colombia certainly is a potential next target. We saw the President Donald Trump mention Colombia. We also have heard other countries like Mexico mentioned in a list of potential targets. And so as a result, I think that criminal syndicates like the ELN will respond in kind. They are going to try and quiet their operations, not cease their operations, but try and identify new creative, innovative ways to dodge law enforcement and detection. And this will complicate efforts, especially given the fact that so much of the United States law enforcement resources, with its Customs and Border Enforcement, with its Coast Guard, with its Drug Enforcement Administration, has now been reoriented towards criminalizing and going after these networks directly rather than monitoring and detecting and trying to identify their different patterns of smuggling and trafficking.
And what's the state of Venezuela's relationship with other actors and regimes now that Maduro has been captured? We've seen reports of Hezbollah's involvement in drug trafficking to generate revenue in Venezuela, other Iranian aligned groups, Russian-based criminal groups. How do they react to Maduro's capture?
Maduro's capture is a test case, as I mentioned, in this moment in international affairs. Again, it proves that the Trump administration is willing to go the distance in terms of not only capturing, but also detaining and trying different world leaders. It's also pushing the boundaries of international law and challenging the principles of territorial sovereignty as well. And this will, I think, signal different messages to different adversaries and state and non-state groups abroad, particularly those that have had influence or even a foothold in Venezuela. I think Hezbollah is a very interesting case. They've engaged with the Maduro government. They also engaged to a degree with the government of Chavez as well. They've had a footprint in Venezuela along with their Margarita Island as well, using this as a foothold for illicit activities such as money laundering, drug trafficking, and a way to really identify alternative revenue streams. And after 2025, after Hezbollah was severely weakened by Israel through repetitive strikes in Lebanon, they very much turned their attention to Venezuela as a way to strengthen alternative revenue and to improve their posture and diversify. And now that the Trump administration has conducted these strikes, and now that the United States will be, in some cases, operating and running the government of Venezuela, I think that Hezbollah will definitely try and lay low, quiet its operations, and potentially turn its sights to other areas that they've been engaged in illicit activities, like, for example, Western Africa.
And Caroline, you touched on this a bit before, but can you expand on the idea of countries that might come next or might be the next target for the Trump administration? Many analysts have been looking at Colombia, potentially Mexico, Cuba. How do you foresee this playing out?
Well, I think it really depends on the incentive structure for the United States. When we look back just a few months ago, this campaign began under the premise of pursuing narco terrorists, actors that the administration deemed were not only armed actors, but actors that were engaging in illicit trafficking. And that definition has been bent and expanded to include different groups. We've seen even the definition of terrorist actors expanded to include illicit criminal syndicates. And I think in this with this case of the capture of Maduro, it's also been made clear that the United States is seeking to improve its own economic standing through the acquisition of opportunities in Venezuela's oil sector. So I think it really depends on what priority really lies at the core of the Trump administration's agenda. Is it security? Is it competition against rivals? Is it truly a crackdown on illicit trafficking and smuggling? Or are there other incentive structures in place? And I think that the president has already turned his sights to countries like Mexico. He's also mentioned Cuba. He's mentioned Colombia. But we've also heard other countries like Greenland. We've also even heard some reports of this potentially turning into escalation against Iran. This could be something that could set the Trump administration on a pathway that is quite uncertain and unstable as well.
Thanks for that, Caroline. And lastly, in this new Venezuela now, with whether it's the US running it for however long that might be, whatever a new government might look like, what, in your view, is the most pressing criminal threat that a new government would have to most urgently address?
Well, I think that when we look towards there's no particular group that I think right now will stand out. And especially while we might hear a tendency to name and shame and point to CDS as the sole actor and key threat in Venezuela, again, it's less of a hierarchical structure and more so of a dynamic and culture that persists. So I think that really the real threat is fighting corruption with corruption. If the United States continues and perpetuates this winner takes all dynamic in Venezuela, if they reward the existing governmental officials and if they reward key stakeholders that are already embedded in Venezuela's political economy, rather than try and identify ways to even the scale and rebalance not only the political system, but the Venezuelan economy. I think that that would be a successful strategy. But I am worried, given the focus on the oil sector, the focus on the economic benefits for the United States, for oil companies flooding in, that this actually might open Venezuela up to additional corruption and create greater space for not only competition, but for other criminal syndicates to enter the fold.
Well, thank you so much, Caroline, for joining me today. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please be sure to stay updated with the New Lines Institute's Crime-Conflict Nexus Portfolio as we follow the situation closely and will be releasing new products soon. Thanks.